Good morning. I'm John Hilbolt, Director of Lectures and Seminars here at Heritage, and it's my privilege to welcome everyone to our Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those on all of these occasions who join us on our heritage.org website. Would ask everyone in-house as a courtesy to our speaker to see that cell phones have been turned off as we prepare to begin. And, of course, we will post the program within 24 hours on our Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference. Our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our event today is Luke Coffey, our Margaret Thatcher Fellow in the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Mr. Coffey, of course, studies and writes on U.S. and United Kingdom relations. He focuses in particular on defense and security matters, including the role of NATO and the European Union and in transatlantic security. Before joining us at Heritage, he served at the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense as Senior Special Advisor to then British Defense Secretary Liam Fox. He was the only non-British citizen appointed by Prime Minister David Cameron to provide advice to senior British ministers. Prior to this, he worked in the House of Commons as an advisor on defense and security issues for the Conservative Party. His work in British politics followed his service to the United States as a commissioned officer in the Army, stationed in Italy with the Army's Southern European Task Force. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Luke Coffey. Luke?
Thank you, John, and thanks to everyone coming today here to the Heritage Foundation. The three Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have proven to be committed American allies since they regained their independence at the end of the Cold War. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, each has made huge progress in implementing democracy, rule of law, economic freedom, and building a very strong national defense. They accomplished this by aligning themselves with the West, while rejecting Russian calls to at least stay neutral in terms of their alignment after the Cold War, or being fully underneath the post-Cold War Russian umbrella itself. While small in size and population, the Baltic states actually represent something much bigger geopolitically. They are staunch defenders of economic freedom, of liberal democracy, and of human rights. This is why the U.S. should deepen its security cooperation by proactively seeking new areas of cooperation and building on old ties that already exist. It is in America's interest as well as NATO's interests for this to happen. This is why it is an honor and a pleasure to introduce the Latvian Defense Minister, Dr. Artis Pabriks, to speak to us today on security challenges in the Baltic region, a view from Latvia. Dr. Pabriks has served as Latvia's defense minister since November of 2010, and I'm not 100% certain, but I think that probably makes you one of the longer consecutively serving defense ministers in Europe.
No,
One of the, maybe. This is a rotating door, it seems, with defense ministers in Europe. During his time as defense minister, he experienced two major NATO summits. He oversaw the deployment of Latvian troops to places like Afghanistan, on missions supporting counter-piracy off the Horn of Africa, and also to Mali for training there. He also oversaw the formulation and publication of the Latvian state defense concept. Before his current role as defense minister, Dr. Pabriks served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2004 to 2007. Throughout his time in Parliament, which he entered in 2004, he served in a number of parliamentary positions, including on both the Foreign Affairs Committee and the European Affairs Committee. And before all of this, believe it or not, Dr. Pabriks had a successful career in academia, focusing on issues such as multiculturalism, nationalism, security policy, and human rights. Therefore, it goes without saying that we should consider ourselves honored and indeed lucky to be able to hear from such a distinguished and experienced minister and statesman today. First, I'll ask Dr. Pabriks to speak to us, and then I will give a few remarks about a publication that Heritage has released today on U.S.-Baltic security cooperation, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Pabriks.
Thank you very much. Well, probably I have to read more Google about my biography to get more self-confidence. Sometimes I'm forgetting that. But anyway, thank you very much for possibility to speak on front of such auditorium and such an institution. It's not my the first time in Heritage Foundation, but it's first time I think in this room. And I probably also have to say hello not only to people who are in this hall, but also those who are joining us slowly or quickly on YouTube, because we can have this discussion being seen. We can see this also in the internet, and probably with the assistance of NSA, there will be a lot of viewers in a half an hour. As far as our today's discussion, I really look forward for questions, because I really would enjoy more discussion. But for the beginning, to encourage you, I probably would have to say a few words also about the report, which was just given for public eye regarding the cooperation between the United States and the Baltic countries. And I was amazed to see how much or how many good suggestions you could read at the end of this paper, what and how we could still improve our cooperation. So that really encourages me also in my practical work. As far as the situation at this stage around the Baltic Sea in the northern European region where Baltic countries are situated, I would start probably with a more Nordic approach, not telling that everything is great, even if there are many things which are fine, but I would say that in some aspects we are worried. We are worried in some aspects, and I would say that there are three directions or three reasons why we are worried. The first reason is the general global development. The general global development, which, as we all know, speaks in favor of changing United States priorities towards the Pacific, about the decrease of defense spending in United States, about the general transformation process in United States. And this is an issue which is very important for us, because we consider United States as our strategic partner in the region. And we cannot imagine that, let's say, our ties could be weakened. And this is why I think also such a report is important, because we have to work on the way how we can find how to improve and strengthen this tie. Because looking from the Baltic perspective, and maybe this is a bit narrow-minded, but this is definitely a Baltic perspective, we think that if the strategic tie and links, transatlantic links between the Europe and United States, and between the Northern Europe and United States, and Baltics and United States will weaken, that might in general endanger also the security situation around the Baltic Sea, and particularly in the Baltic region, which is a place where all three Baltic countries, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, are situated. Second thing which worries us is the general developments in our Europe, in European continent, because at this stage we can see the general effect of austerity, general effects of crisis, and as one of the German journalists on German TV just a few weeks ago told, a little bit with an irony, crisis has stabilized in Europe. So basically we see a stabilization of crisis situation in Europe, and one of the first directions where austerity really is taking place in Europe, it is European defense. We know that European defense in general is not so efficient as a United States defense situation, because if we compare, for instance, those euros or dollars spent, how efficiently they are spent, and European countries, at least not all, but maybe most of them, are a little bit or more than a little bit behind the United States. But taking into account that there is a general disarmament going on in European continent, this has to make us worry. Because, and I can see a lot of reasons for that. It's maybe time in this case to leave it rather for discussion later. But one of the reasons is a general attitude of post-Second World War Europeans. who think, the young generations, the generations which have been born after the Second World War, they think basically that security in Europe is provided by two sources. And this thinking is grounded in two philosophical views. One source, it is God. So if you are a believer, then God provides peace and security. You should not worry about anything. And the second source is United States of America. So if we cannot provide security ourselves, then United States will take care of us. And we in the Baltics, I think we understand quite well that it is not an honest approach towards taxpayers in USA, because why in the event of crisis, why in the event of, let's say, decreasing economic activities, why should United States pay so much money for the defense of Europe if Europeans still have enough of resources? So this is a very understandable question. If I would be in the same situation like our American politicians and statesmen, I would have also a problem to argue with my constituencies. Just in the same way, like now when Latvia is proceeding already out of crisis, we have been the first country which have been hit by crisis, and we are probably the first which are out of this crisis with growth in the last 2 years already more than 4% per year of our GDP. We are joining now a common European currency starting from the 1st of January, which in my view is a great success. We will be 18th country joining Euro. And then some of our people at home are asking, listen, we are joining Euro, we are still not so rich as, for instance, Greece, which is in the middle of the crisis, and after we join Euro, we would have to pay to help this country, which is richer than we are. So for many people, this is not let's say, a just approach. Why should the more poor participant help somebody who is more rich to get out of crisis? But this is a way of solidarity within the Eurozone, and I think there is not just a simple answer, why should we do this? I think the importance by itself that we are joining Eurozone is overwhelming, because that gives us a chance to get more influence in European continent, and by that I also would say that gives us also more chance to influence a transatlantic connection between United States and Europe, which is very dear and valuable for Baltic countries for different reasons, subjective and objective. So the general events in Europe are worrying us. I will not go now in depth, but this is not exactly what we should be happy about. And the third reason is the general developments in the Baltic Sea area. Looking from the security perspective globally, we would say that after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the general balance did not change very much, because NATO remains the strongest military organization in the world. So there's no other countries, including Russia, which can really challenge that. But if you are looking particularly to the details and to the regions, then you can see that in the last 10 years, the situation of balance changed quite drastically. If we are looking to our neighboring Russian expenses and military, we can see that since during the last few years, basically the rise almost doubled as far as military expenses. Every year, Russia is adding at least 10 to 12% to their military expenses. And of course, exercises, maneuvers, strategic developments. As I'm speaking here, I just got a report out of my ministry telling that today we again experienced let's say, flight close to our borders with 5 planes, among which was A-50, 2 Su-27 and 2 Tu-22. So such type of flights where NATO planes are also given, let's say, the permit to go up and look who is flying, because transponders are not working, are happening more frequently and more frequently. So, for instance, if we are comparing such flights today with 2004, then in 2004, and 2004 I mentioned because this is a year when Latvia joined NATO, we had exactly one time when NATO planes had to go up. compared with last year, it is 30 times. And seems like it's not stopping also after exercises of maneuvers up at 2013 have been taking place next to the Baltic, Polish and Finnish borders. So the disbalance, the military disbalance is worrying us. And this is not because we are thinking that there is a possibility of any type of aggression, but this leaves possibility for speculations. This leaves possibility of fear, and this leaves also doors closed now for increasing a trust between the neighbors. And we are neighbors of Russia, we are neighbors of Belarus, and there is no better way how to live together as to build a common trust. And this is not what really is, at this stage, in my view, happening. And additionally, of course, there are such issues as cyber threats, about which we can speak separately. And additional thing is also a question of so-called soft power. And I will not here quote Joseph Nye, what is soft power? We all know what it is, or we can find it. But the influence of soft power of Russia in the Baltic Sea region and the Baltic region is lately also increasing quite a bit through media, through influencers, through different kinds of fiscal instruments. So this is a question which also makes us to worry, and which on the other hand makes us to think, how can we strengthen ties with our colleagues in the United States, and how can we also increase our influence in European Union in order to be at that central table where, if you can say, the center or the central countries of European Union are sitting. So basically, if I'm finishing now these 10 or 15 minutes of speech in order to encourage your questions, I think that the major priority, what we have been setting after we regained independence in 1991, when the priority was to join EU and NATO, is more or less the same. At that time, our plan was to join. Many were laughing at us. You will not succeed, you will not do this. We succeeded. When we were hit by crisis in 2008, many thought it's over, it will be very difficult to recover. We recovered. Now our major goal is strengthen our regional ties with our Nordic colleagues, Nordic countries, to strengthen the region, strengthen our ties and positions in the local European institutions, first of all European Union, which is important for us despite of all the shortcomings. And the third is not to allow to deconstruct the important, strong transatlantic link between the Europe and United States. So we are ready to do almost anything to encourage this, this cooperation between Europe and United States. And I would say this is partly because we are thinking, of course, in many ways also in national terms, because we know if that post-Second World War order, which created these international institutions, which created this cooperation between Europe and United States, will fail or will become weaker, we as a countries on the, I would say, geographical periphery of European Union will be first to pay the bill. And we don't want anymore to pay the bill, which might be similar to that before the catastrophe of the Second World War. I think with that I will stop. Just yes, I will stop now, and I guess there will be questions where I can add those things which I maybe forgot to tell or did not manage to mention in this short presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for those interesting remarks, and also thank you for your kind words about the report.
They were honest.
Yeah, thank you. I will try also to keep my remarks short because I understand the value of the question and answer and the dialogue that we can have after this discussion. There are copies of the report that was published today that should be available to you. If you haven't already grabbed a copy, make sure you do on your way out. As I mentioned in my introduction, the Baltic states have been staunch defenders and supporters of the ideas of economic freedom, of human rights, of liberal democracy, of a strong national defense. And these are many of the same values that we cherish here in the United States. They experienced the negative effects of Soviet rule over 5 decades in a way that many countries never did. And I think it's because of this experience from that period of time that today they cherish these values more than others, and they don't take these sort of values for granted. So why should the U.S. care about the Baltic states today? American policymakers should care about maintaining these close relations because, as I said, the Baltic states stand for and represent many of these same values that Americans hold dearly. American policymakers should also care about the Baltics for treaty reasons. We have treaty obligations under NATO. American policymakers should care about the Baltic states because the 3 Baltic states show a degree of enthusiasm and support for transatlantic relations, which is frankly difficult to find or in some cases non-existent on both sides of the Atlantic. But U.S. support for the Baltic states is not a new concept by any means. The U.S. has been a longtime supporter of the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. And it's worth actually just painting a bit of a picture here with the history briefly. After World War I, the 3 Baltic nations proclaimed their independence. And by 1923, the U.S. had granted full recognition to all 3. Fast forward a couple of decades, and in June of 1940, as part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, Soviet troops entered and began the occupation of the 3 Baltic countries. But later that month, after that pact was agreed in June of 1940, the acting U.S. Secretary of State, Sumner Welles, issued what was later to be known as the Welles Declaration, condemning the occupation, stating America's refusal to recognize the legitimacy of the Soviet control over these 3 Baltic states. The Welles Declaration formed the basis of U.S. policy towards the Baltic states to the end of the Cold War. During this time, the U.S. welcomed exiled Baltic diplomatic delegations and accredited their diplomats. The U.S. even proudly flew the flags of the 3 Baltic states in the State Department's Hall of Flags throughout this occupation. Since the end of the Cold War, as I've mentioned, all 3 have made good progress in various areas. And they've accomplished this, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, by aligning themselves with Euro-Atlantic structures and with the United States. The desire to integrate in these Euro-Atlantic structures and into Western political structures and security structures should not be considered surprising, and I think is simply reflective of the region's culture and heritage. The Baltic states are Western. They're not Eastern. The history of the Baltic states is one first dominated by Germans, by Danes, by Poles, by Swedes. Even after becoming absorbed into Tsarist Russia, they still held on to their Western cultural and historical identities. In terms of economic freedom, the Baltic region is a good model for Europe and the rest of the world, and it actually shows that if you pursue policies of economic growth, you can have stronger economies. Consequently, the Baltic region has become a beacon of hope for many in the former Soviet Union. And the memories of the Soviet occupation and the bullying and intimidation that the countries on Russia's periphery face today, and then the 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia, shape much of the defense and security thinking in the Baltic region today. And this cannot be ignored or airbrushed. It is a fact. It is true that Russia no longer poses a direct military threat to Europe in the same way it did during the Cold War. But Russia's future has offered many reasons for concern. Russia has reversed many of the post-communist reforms it went after the end of the Cold War. Democratic freedoms are in retreat and corruption is endemic. While the economy is still growing, it's heavily dependent on the export of hydrocarbons and other raw materials. Russia's population is in decline for a number of reasons. This has all led to expressions of ultranationalism, which are on the rise, and these expressions of ultranationalism fortify the government's quest to carve out a new sphere of influence. And this is a cause of concern for the Baltics, which lived under the Russian yoke for 50 years, and it shouldn't surprise us. In a way that's simply unimaginable to us here in the United States or in Canada or in some of our Western European partners in NATO, Russia is still a factor for many Eastern Europeans in terms of military formulation and foreign policy development. Since the early 1990s, the Baltic states have done what many thought at the time was impossible in terms of defense and security. They developed modern Western-trained armed forces, they joined NATO, and they've served gallantly in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, the Balkans, and several other places around the world, many times alongside U.S. service personnel. In many ways, they do punch above their weight inside NATO. Estonia is only one of 4 countries inside NATO that spend the 2% of GDP requirement on defense. Latvia and Lithuania have actually gave political pledges to meet this 2% of GDP requirement by 2020. It's a political pledge now, but defense spending is slowly increasing, and that political pledge is more than what most other European countries in NATO have given, who many bury their heads into the sand over Europe's defense decline. With regional defense initiatives like the Baltic Defense College, the Baltic Battalion, the Baltic Naval Squadron, the Baltic Air Surveillance Network, the Baltics have shown other NATO countries that regional cooperation with defense initiatives can actually work under the right circumstances. The Baltics have been deeply involved in the future of NATO, and this is a great example of this is the hosting of NATO's Centers of Excellence. In Estonia, they host the Cyber Center of Excellence, recognizing the importance of cybersecurity in the 21st century and having experienced a cyber attack in 2007 that originated in Russia. Lithuania, being 100% dependent on Russian natural resources for its energy use, has established NATO's Center of Excellence for Energy Security. Latvia, although it hasn't established a center of excellence yet, it's in the process of doing so, and I believe you just had your first detailed meeting last week on creating the framework for this, and it's going to be a center of excellence for strategic communications. I mean, just think of this day and age we live in today with 24-hour news, the internet, globalization, telecommunications, social media, and then fighting wars in faraway places and having to convince your publics why this is in our national interest to do so. As Latvia has recognized this as a new challenge for NATO and has, took the initiative to establish a center of excellence, which hopefully by, I think, the latter half of 2014 will become a reality. I mean, the Baltic states identify a problem and a challenge for NATO, and they act on it. And this effort inside NATO is driven by a desire of the Baltic states to be seen as net contributors, not net consumers of security. The Baltic states want to be viewed by others in the alliance as small and needy members. This motivates the Baltic states to contribute disproportionately high to NATO security operations. And they rightly do so, expecting that if NATO or the U.S. is ever needed in their region, the alliance will be there. Now, as I mentioned, I published a report today on U.S.-Baltic security cooperation, and copies are made available. I touch on many of the issues I just discussed today, and actually many of the issues that Dr. Pabriks discussed are also touched on in this paper. But more importantly, I conclude the paper with 22 recommendations. U.S.-Baltic security cooperation is already good. But with these 22 recommendations, the Heritage Foundation feels like that relationship can go one step further and be that much better. Some of these recommendations are symbolic. For example, more senior level engagement between the U.S. government and the Baltic states. Secretary Kerry, since becoming Secretary of State, traveled 169,000 miles, visited 30 different countries before he finally visited an American ally in Eastern Europe. So just more engagement. It's symbolic, but it's important in international affairs. Some of the recommendations are a bit more ambitious. For example, I propose that the U.S. might consider establishing a Baltic Sea rotational force modeled off the Black Sea rotational force that will allow a U.S. Marine Corps unit to operate in the Baltic Sea and conduct training exercise, not only with the Baltic states, but this would benefit Poland, and it would also benefit non-NATO partners like Finland and Sweden. As I said, I know that's ambitious, but it's something that I think should be considered. And some of my recommendations are a bit out of the box in terms of how I think Americans view its security relationships with Europeans. As Dr. Pabriks alluded to, the Baltics have a very close relationship with the Nordic countries. So one of my recommendations is that the U.S. should find ways to improve its relationship with the Nordic countries as a way to improve America's relationship with the Baltic countries. And Norway and Denmark played important roles immediately after the Cold War in helping the Baltic states establish some of these regional defense initiatives. Sweden and Finland are also important actors in the region, although they're not part of NATO. If NATO was ever called to act in the region, the use of Swedish and Finnish airspace and land would be a requirement. So the U.S. should think about how it can use its relations in Europe as a way to further its relations with the Baltic states. I will conclude by saying how grateful and thankful that Dr. Pabriks, how grateful we are to have you speak to us today and take time out of your busy schedule. And I hope that something that I have said and something that Dr. Pabriks has said has sparked some sort of discussion or question. And I think we will now turn it over to Q&A. And we have I'd say probably about 25 minutes or so for the Q&A, 25 minutes. There'll be microphones floating around. If you could please raise your hand, and when you're given the microphone, please state your name, and if you have any sort of affiliation, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman in the back there. Oh, sorry.
Ivan Benovich, interning here at the Heritage Foundation. My question is, what is the attitude of the Russian-speaking minority in Latvia towards Latvian membership in the NATO and towards its defense cooperation with the West? Do they generally support it, or is it more like the attitudes of the Russian-speaking minority in the Crimea? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good question, taking into account that in my early times I was writing my PhD about minorities and nationalism. I would say that, first of all, for those who study this issue, especially in the Baltics, it's a question how to define a Russian minority. Because we have so-called ethnic Russians who have been coming to the Baltic countries at least in 4 waves, starting with the first political refugees in 17th century, afterwards 19th century industrial part, and then during the revolution, again emigrating, and then post-Soviet immigrants who already came after the Second World War. And I would say that attitudes also here internally differ. And in general, I would say that probably among ethnic Russians who live in Latvia, the attitude is more skeptical towards EU and NATO than among ethnic Latvians. But by saying this, I must say also that I am not the one who very much likes the collectivist or communitarian approach. I myself find more important to base analysis on the individual approach, and it's always difficult, to put some kind of stereotypes on one or another group. But from this perspective, I think it's very important that there are no hindrances for the further integration of so-called Soviet-era immigrants in the Latvian society, because for many of these people who came after the Second World War, they did not have enough good Latvian language knowledge. By that, they were not listening enough maybe of local news or European news. They were still in tradition by watching what is coming from Russia. And if we are looking without prejudice to the media system in Russia, sorry to say, I would not call it the most free media. So here you can see also these questions of soft power and political influences. So I think this is a question where we have to work more intensely. And I even would suggest, if I would be out of my job now, I would really suggest the question how how we could compare the different integration aspects of post-Soviet and Soviet-era immigrants in the Baltic countries and in the rest of the, at least, European Union. I think that would be a very good item to work on.
Thank you. The lady in the front here.
My name is Marina Kaljurand. I'm a student ambassador. First of all,
Hello,
I'd like
madam.
to thank and congratulate Heritage Foundation on the great discussion today, and also Luke on your paper. I haven't read it, but I'll do it tonight.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Minister, it's always great to see you in DC. It's always great to listen to you. And you raised very important questions I'd like to touch two of them, defense spending and cyber. Could you please elaborate in more details what are the concrete steps that Latvian government is going to undertake to raise its spending, military spending, because we all know that, as Luke mentioned, there are only 4 countries that are fulfilling today 2%, and also what are concrete steps in cyber? Thank you.
Good. Well, I will try to be short in this case. First of all, we all know that military spending is under the very great pressure from other parts of society, starting with education, social care, Medicare, and etc. This is not the issue I should tell Americans probably, with your internal discussions. So you always have to find a motivation how to sell military spending or defense spending. And what I'm doing in Latvia, and I was, at least I think I was fighting toughly enough for our defense spending in the last year, I was trying to compare this with insurance, because once you are buying a car, you also do not plan to, let's say, drive into some oak tree or somewhere else, but you are paying for the insurance, either for car or for house, because if something happens, you have some place where you can get an assistance. So this is the same with defense. You are not planning a war, you are not planning a crisis, but if suddenly it happens, there is somebody who can help you. In concrete case, we lost in the Latvian budget because of the crisis of 2008-2010, almost 50% of our defense budget. I think it was too much. It was too much and it was very difficult to recover. But once the crisis is coming, you have also, let's say, the positive part of that. And I would say that compared with most of European nations, I think that Latvian military at this moment doesn't have any extra fat. They have only muscles left, and I think that that money, what we are spending on our defense, is very efficiently spent. So by coming here by plane, yesterday I read some articles about the reform process of military in the United States, and I'm not tended here to compare the sizes and the responsibilities, but I still think that there are at least some nuances where we could maybe say a good word. How did we went through, let's say, decrease of amounts of money by keeping efficiency, by keeping our enrollment in international operations, by even increasing this and by making our military sufficient. And the second thing is how to increase the money. We managed last year to pass a bill in our parliament telling that in 2020 we hope to reach 2% of GDP for military. It's a very, very ambitious target. And let's say, I don't want also to be dishonest and to tell that I have a guarantee that we will reach. But where we, especially because our GDP is growing compared to many other European countries, so it's even more difficult. I think defense ministers are one of the most skeptical when GDP is growing. It's difficult to get those percentage rates. But what is important? It's important that we have an increase. We have an increase with every year. Last year, we got an increase more than 10% for our defense spending in Latvia. This year, percentage rate is smaller, but we had opened a number of new policies. And this is concretely for my Estonian colleague. What are the major, let's say, directions where new money will go for new projects? First project is NATO Excellence Center, where we already granted for next year more than 3 million euros. And we are determined to show that this is extremely important question, strategic communication for all NATO member countries. Secondly, we are going forward with mechanization of our ground troops. So we are hopefully in the final process, and next year we will start already the first purchases of vehicles, armored vehicles needed for our ground defense. The third direction is our special operation forces. We all know that special operation forces in the new challenges, they are very important. So this is where we are giving additional money. So we know that with every year which is coming now, our budget will increase. We will fight for that to increase it, and most important, we will use it efficiently for new projects. And we very much hope that there will be also enough projects where we can work together with our Baltic partners and with our Nordic partners. And here I would add to this our Nordic cooperation. I think that it's important that we together with United States are tackling also the issue, and I know how how careful we should be about this issue, but we are tackling, let's say, the discourse about NATO membership in other Nordic countries which are members only in the EU. Because our strategic position in Riga, in capital of Latvia, is that it is important to succeed that all EU members are NATO members and all NATO members in European continent are also EU members. So that's where we think it's important to put our international efforts together.
Thank you. The gentleman here.
Egils Milbergs, I'm from Seattle, Center for Accelerating Innovation. My question is a follow-up, actually, to what you're talking about, the connection of the economy and security. It may not be your portfolio, but could you elaborate on what the strategies might be to bolster the economic growth and prosperity in Latvia, the Baltic region? And more specifically, what kinds of opportunities do you see in economic integration and the Baltic Sea region, and how the American business community might better relate and support the Latvian economy?
Good question.
Thank you. Here will be also one question. So, but I'll try to answer. Well, first, it's a more difficult question because it's not so much a defense issue. It's partly only defense issue or defense minister's issue. But I think we succeeded to get out of crisis. We succeeded to get, again, a growing budget already for a second year, and it will grow. We succeeded to bolster our exports and to make our economy more efficient. But we had also the dark side of last crisis. And the dark side is the increasing Gini index. So I think we still have in Latvia too many poor people. And I think one of the long-term economic necessities is to assist to decrease the difference between the middle class and the rich on the one side and very poor people on the other side. So I think this is important because this will give also more fundament for people to believe in the system, to people to believe in our economic success. As far as regional cooperation, I don't think that national borders should limit our success or our cooperation necessities in the industries. I think that take into account that countries around us are quite rich, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway. That makes, on the one hand, people in the Baltic states to be more ambitious, because if your neighbors are rich, you also want to be like your neighbors. So it gives us a drive. And we are more vital in this case because we have nothing to lose, only our chains. And secondly, it gives also the opportunity to combine these efforts, the stability with vitality. As far as Americans, I think what America should do, we are still lacking larger American investments in our region. As far as my business is concerned, the defense, I think we should increase the cooperation and improve the cooperation, which is already good. As far as, for instance, the northern distribution line, I think this is where Americans should consider consider our proposals, what we are suggesting, and I have few of them which I will put on front of the Secretary of Defense and also on your logistics people here. Because we have companies which would like to assist your soldiers. We have opportunities to do so. So this is a way how we can work together. And I would say also in my personal case, last year we established Association of Military Industry in Latvia. And they are looking very much forward how they can cooperate and contribute to our defense development and also our integration of our industry into the European or global military industry. And this is what I told also to my European colleagues in one of the meetings. We Latvians or we Balts, we are not going to be eternal potato growers. We had enough of good experience, industrial experience already 100 years ago. And we would like to have also, let's say, our place and our share in this business. It's not a big one. We are a small country, but I definitely believe we can have a niche here.
Gentleman in the front here.
Mr. Minister, good morning. Andrew Jensen with the Harvard University Extension School. I'd like a follow-on question. You've spoken at great length about the centrality of European integration for Latvia's defensive posture. I wonder if you could speak a bit to the the viability with which Latvia would treat the proposed Eurasian Union integration that Russia has forwarded, expanding the existing customs union between Kazakhstan, the Russian Federation, and Belarus into a more comprehensive union. Does Latvia take that proposal seriously? And if so, what would the ramifications of a greater Eurasian integration be on Latvia's defensive posture?
Thank you. Well, first of all, we did not receive such a proposals, and even if we would receive such proposals, we would not consider, because we do not belong to Eurasia, we belong to Europe. But as far as the Russian policy, I would say that maybe my subjective, but my understanding of Russian approach to its partners around Russia, like Ukraine, like Belarus, like Caucasian countries in Central Asia, is based on the idea to reintegrate them in the previous territory of Soviet Union. And I don't think that this is a secret. This is information what we got, for instance, from a famous Valdai conference. Because if you are looking even on the Twitter, you can see one of the Russian thinkers, Trenin, speaking about these 7 points what Putin have been proposing. And President Putin in Russia have been proposing basically the reintegration of this area. And I think in 2 of those 7 points, there is indirect direction, the indirect message also to such countries as the Baltic countries. And of course, from the security perspective, we are considering them a little bit, I would say, with concern, because we don't think that we would encourage such type of integration if it is not based on voluntary and free basis and not based on the common values. So, but let's leave Russia aside, because one thing is what Russia is doing, and Russia is of course trying to expand its soft power and other powers and influence. This is normal what countries are doing. I would say rather that this is a question about our weakness, the weakness of us in the West, the weakness of us in Europe, because we have not been giving enough of attention and enough of concern for these countries which are to the east of us, so-called Eastern Partnership, what we call in European Union, which is Belarus, which is Ukraine, which is Moldova, which is Caucasian countries, and Central Asia. And Central Asia, in my view, is also an extremely important region where which I think was in many ways neglected or overlooked, looking either from Washington or from Brussels, for different reasons, again, subjective or objective. But I think our policies for a long time have not been enough coherent, strong, and well-directed as far as this region. We have to change this if we want to succeed and if we want to help these countries and if we want to help ourselves. And at the end, it will not be a harm for Russia too, because Russia, first of all, needs a democratic, developing and stable partners around. And I think the Baltic countries is a good example for that, because we don't need anything else in our relationship with Russia as a good, friendly, trustful relationship, nothing more.
I think we have time for one more. Okay, the gentleman in the back.
Henry Hedger, researcher at NARA. I looked at the backgrounder momentarily before we began this discussion, and I wondered, with the drawdown in, both Iraq and now in Afghanistan, almost complete, what do you anticipate by 2015 to be your involvements overseas? They show in the backgrounder Somalia and Mali as 2 points where you try to counter the terrorist threats. And piracy. What do you foresee yourself? Is there anything else on the horizon?
Good question, and difficult one. Because first of all, looking from the Latvian defense strategy, we are ready to participate in future in military operations outside our country. Again, one of the biggest reasons is our solidarity, because we understand we have to be engaged actively, politically and militarily in international affairs, because for small countries this is the only way how to survive. We want to give our solidarity in order to expect solidarity back. As far as Afghanistan, we are all waiting for agreement between, let's say, United States and Afghan government in order to know what exactly we can expect and how can we exactly plan. how much and with what kind of assistance we can keep ourselves or be present in Afghanistan if it is needed in Afghanistan. But we are ready to do this. Secondly, if we are looking to Africa, we are at this moment as a country involved in 2 missions. One mission is Mali, which is European Union mission, and other mission is less maybe known, but not less important. It's Liberia. In Liberia, we're engaged together with United States, or more precisely with Michigan National Guards. And I would like to use also this opportunity to tell from this podium, thank you very much to Michigan National Guards, because this was the organization and this was the state which assisted to develop our military after 1991. And what we are doing now in Liberia is actually just the same, because we are helping to bring American knowledge of military reform to Liberians, because Liberians understand it much better from us, because we have been going through all this process, and we are basically rebuilding now Liberian army from scratch. And I think it's much easier to teach somebody who can see that you yourself have been doing this than simply to take, let's say, a theoretical note. So this is a cooperative aspect of our common value where we are doing in Liberia. As far as Africa, let's just mention one fact. We are all speaking about demography, decline of the West, rise of the East, etc. But if we are looking to demography, what do we see? We see that until 2050, the growth rate in Europe will be something around 18%. In Americas, North and South, it will be about 30%. In Asia, in fact, also about 30%. But in Africa, it will be 105. I think this factor alone, a part of all Arab Springs, instability, Syria, Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, etc., speaks by itself. When we are now following the news about island of Lampedusa, about migration, I personally believe that there will be a lot of necessities to be engaged in North Africa, especially for Europeans, because this is almost a Europe. Basically, there is just 100 miles or so between both continents. And the second place where I think we should keep our eyes open is actually Central Asia. Because if our success in Afghanistan is failing, if Afghanistan is somewhere failing, Central Asia will be the first to be hurt in that region too. So just to give you the idea, so we do not exclude other types of cooperation and other places, but I think this is where we should concentrate our attention, maybe most of all. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. You have definitely helped us understand these issues even better. Even someone who has been working on these issues, researching to publish this report, I almost feel like perhaps I should have waited to hear the minister speak before publishing the report, because I could add even more to it.
We can rewrite it.
Yes, of course.
We can mention Latvia more. You know.
Yeah. And also, I want to, as I think I probably speak on behalf of most in this room, and as a former Afghan vet myself, thank Latvia for its contribution, to Afghanistan, and it means a lot. And Madam Ambassador, also Estonia, and that goes the same with Lithuania, if there are any Lithuanian reps in the room. But and thank you for coming, Madam Ambassador. With that, we shall conclude the video of this event will be online in about 24 hours, and you can find the backgrounder published today outside or online at heritage.org. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.